Previously on the Build Better Brains project.
We are going to explode this C4. There need be no reluctance in disassembling your handbells. Let's get started. We withdraw the cap screw from the handle. We'll find a lock washer and I just dropped the stupid thing. They will likely break under the stress. As you can see, they also break quite easily. And if you ever wanted to see what a fully exploded C4 looks like, there it is. Now, if only I knew how to put this back together.
And now, the conclusion.
We'll see if we can put poor little C4 back together again. Hey everyone, welcome to the Build Better Brains Handbell How-To, where we are looking at how to reassemble a Schulmerich handbell. This is the same C4 that we took apart in the last video, checked out its anatomy, and we also talked about the tools that we used. I'm not going to rehash that. You can find it right up here in the iCard or with a link in the description below. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to put on my, these are vinyl gloves, but you can use latex, nitrile, whatever's going to work for you. And we're going to take this one piece at a time, starting where we left off all the way over here at the Yoke Assembly. So first up, we need to take our restraining spring and place it over the shaft. And it is a very snug fit. And then I gently rock it kind of in a twisting motion just to get it started. And it moves along nicely. And then once it's over the top of the shaft, you can push down right on either side of the shaft. You don't want to push down on the wings, but right here on either side of the shaft, and it will slide down. When you get down to where the studs are, just turn it a little bit to get the first stud in, and then turn the yoke the other way to bring the other stud in. And then you want to make sure that the restraining spring is fully seated against the block there at the bottom of the shaft, all the way down. There we go, great. Now we can start threading on our anti-friction washers. And yes, we do want to twist, not push against the threads on the studs. And then we can take the neoprene bumpers and thread those on. One on each side. And then finally our stop nuts. And we just need to have them on there right now. We're not going to actually tighten the stop nut down until I have the yoke assembly installed inside of the casting, because we're going to need to do some adjustment that you really can't do outside of the belt. So let's just review real quick. We have the restraining spring over the shaft pushed all the way down against the block, and then we have the anti-friction washers, the neoprene bumpers, and the stop nuts. Next up, we're going to get ready to reattach our select-to-strike head. So I'm going to set down the yoke, pick up the head, and we'll take the clapper restraining screw, put that over the top, and then turn it over while holding it in and place the lock washer over the back of the clapper screw. And then we'll just set that into the end of the shaft. And I tighten this by hand at first. And then I'm not going to crank down on this either, because we're going to need to turn the head to voice it properly. So I'm just going to turn it just a tiny bit here with a flathead screwdriver so that it isn't spinning around and going to flop all over the place. And now we have a complete yoke assembly here with the select-to-strike clapper installed, and we're ready to move on to the next step. So we'll set that aside, and we'll pick up the casting and find the strike point scribe, which is right there. And we'll set the casting on the table with the strike point on the table side, and then turn the casting down so that now the strike point is facing me. We're ready to take up the Master Touch disc, the Handguard disc, and set it over the tang and the index pin. Now, a word about proper orientation on these. This is a C major diatonic disc, and so on the current generation of discs, it says Schulmerich on both sides, it says C4 on both sides. It doesn't matter which way you turn it. However, if you're working with the accidentals, you'll see that it has the sharp note on one side and the flat and harmonic on the other. And so by convention, we want to have the sharp pitch, in this case C#4, upright with respect to the person who's assembling the bell. And then the flat is going to be upside down on the side closest to us. And you'll notice on this earlier previous generation where the handguard says Schulmerich Carillons, that Schulmerich ends up on the left. And so the easy rule of thumb is to have the Schulmerich name on the left side of the disc as you're assembling it. Now we're ready to take up the cap screw and its lock washer, and we'll set that over the top of the cap screw, set it all the way down there, and thread that through the handle or the handle block if you have one of the older style handles. And now looking at the handle, we'll find the campaniform icon. That's right here, or on the earlier generation, it looks like this. And remember, the strike point of the bell is facing us, which means that the campaniform needs to be on the opposite side. So we're going to tip the handle up like this, so that right now the campaniform is facing you in the camera, and the strike point is on me, and we'll align it, the hole underneath here, with the indexing pin, and slip that all the way down. Now, here's where the fun begins. We need to pick this entire mess up and keep in mind that nothing is actually attached to anything yet. So what I will typically do is place my index finger inside of the handle and then cup the rest of the casting with my remaining fingers and my thumb and also my other hand. And we turn the entire thing over. And that way the cap screw cannot escape. And now we'll take the yoke spacer, which again is either a plastic disc like this one, or it'll be a metal cylinder. The plastic spacers like this have two holes in them, one for the cap screw and one for the indexing pin. The metal cylinders, of course, only have the middle hole. And we'll set that over the cap screw. Sometimes you kind of have to rock it down in there. Right, great. All right, here is where the fun begins. On the bottom of the yoke assembly, check as to whether you have one or two index pin holes. This particular yoke only has one. And so we're going to line that up approximately with the index pin, and by feel, get this all lined up. Now, what I'm really doing here is I'm loosening a little bit with my index finger under the handle so that the cap screw is pushing firm against the yoke, but not so hard that I can't find that indexing pin. And this is one of those things where it just takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of practice. When I think I have it, whoops, see, I thought I had it. There we go. When I think I have it, I turn it over, and now I have the entire casting sitting over my hand, and I'm actually holding on to the yoke block still with my hand. And I rotate it ever so gently left and right to make sure that I'm seated over the index pin. When I am fairly confident of that, I can take my hex ball head driver and gently tighten the cap screw a little and see if it will thread on the yoke block. And it looks like I found it. If it didn't work, no big deal. Just back up and give it another shot. There are some bells where I do this 10, 15 times, it feels like. It's just about patience and persistence. Okay, so I've not cranked this down yet. So what I'm doing right now, before I tighten this, is just double checking that the yoke is properly aligned with the inscribed strike point, that the clapper swing comes right to that point, and that I really am seated properly on the index pin and not somehow up against it sideways or anything like that. And likewise, I'm just making sure that the handle has caught the index pin as well. Once I'm happy with that, I go ahead and I hold the yoke block again, and I firmly tighten down the cap screw. I'm not cranking on it, just making sure that it's nice and firm. Great, there we go. And I'm not entirely satisfied with the alignment of the handle guard. No problem, I can just loosen that cap screw, turn the hand guard a little bit so it's properly aligned, and tighten it back down. There we go. Okay, so the handbell is now fully assembled, but we're not quite done yet. First up, we need to check our tension settings here, because right now, oh boy, that's very hard sounding, isn't it? Right now, it's hitting very hard against the bell. So we're going to take our drill and, no, we're not. We're going to take the proper hex head driver. Hey, I have to have a YouTube thumbnail, come on, right? And we're going to adjust the stop nuts just enough that I can get a proper swing on the clapper. I will go into this in more detail on another video, but to suffice it to say, I'm looking to avoid a double bounce on a very gentle mart while still having good control over my dynamics. Okay. And remember that the stop nut that is closest to you is actually adjusting the tension for the front side strike on Schulmerich bells. That's backwards, or the other way around from Malmark bells. So now that my front strike allows me to play a nice piano and a forte, you're also hearing that I'm getting a back ring here. So I'm going to adjust the front side, tighten that down so I don't get an accidental back ring. A little tighter on that. There we go. All right. And what I would typically do is ring it with its neighbor. There we go. And I would be looking to see if it feels like it requires the same amount of effort to ring. Okay. And finally, we just need to adjust the voicing of the bell. And that is a topic all its own as well. But all you need to do to set your voicing with a select to strike clapper is loosen the screw on the end and adjust the angle of the clapper head. Tighten it down gently. Check your sound against the neighbors and make repeated adjustments until you're happy with that. If you're working in a smaller bell, you can also just push the clapper up against the casting like this, if you can't get all your fingers in there, and then tighten that down. And there you go, one completely assembled Schulmerich C4. And it sounds pretty good. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Build Better Brains Handbell How-To. I want to say thank you to everyone who has been supporting these videos. Your comments, your suggestions, your encouragement, and your questions in the YouTube comments all make a big difference, as do the contributions and sponsorships that you make at danielreck.com/buildbetterbrains, as well as on Patreon, PayPal, and through Forzando Arts. Thank you very much for that. And finally, as always, thank you to Forzando Arts for providing all these wonderful instruments that we get to play with. Stay tuned, we have much more coming next time around. Until then, ring on. Where we are going to be properly instrument apart in a previous video right up here in the iCard, and I stumbled over that sentence, so we'll be doing it again. But C sharp is up right here. Boy, clunk. Let's try that again. Wah wah.